Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. After 16 years at head coach, Marvin Lewis is out in Cincinnati. Zach Taylor is in, a young coach. We've seen this trend around the league. What does it mean for fantasy football purposes? Let's preview for 2019 fantasy football the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think the biggest impact of Zach Taylor might be felt by Joe Mixon. We saw last year, though, Mixon had a bit of a breakout. It wasn't that he became an elite fantasy back, but we saw a dramatic increase in his efficiency on a per carry basis. He's up over 5 yards a carry last year after a really ugly season in his first year where he was under 4 yards a carry. We also saw the Bengals really commit to Mixon as their bell cow last year. He averaged 19.9 touches per game. And while that may not sound like a lot, it's a lot. Trust me. There were only 5 running backs in the NFL to average more than 20 carries or 20 touches per game last year. So that's a big time number out of Joe Mixon. Look for more of the same. And in fact, if Zach Taylor does bring some of these concepts that we saw from Sean McVay, because he comes from that tree, we could see a lot of favorable situations for Joe Mixon. If this team runs a lot of 11 personnel, that could put a defense in a situation where they're going to be relying on their sub packages. For fantasy purposes, what the heck does that mean? It means there's an extra defensive back on the field. If there's an extra defensive back or 2 on the field, there is an advantage for that running back, and that running back is going to be able to produce bigger numbers. If you want a prime example, go back and look at Todd Gurley with Jeff Fisher, where he was facing a lot of base defense. Then go look at Todd Gurley under Sean McVay, facing a lot of sub-package defense. It's a very different situation, despite it being essentially the same exact player, right? So this is very good for Mixon, primed to take another step forward for fantasy purposes. He's locked in as an RB1. And we know for years, A.J. Green was locked in as a wide receiver 1 for fantasy purposes. He's been one of the better fantasy receivers over the last decade. Of course, he is getting up there in age. Now, he's not over the hill just yet, but he is 31 years old this season, so starting to get up there, yes, and then also coming off an injury last year. I don't think we can view A.J. Green as a borderline elite fantasy wide receiver any longer, but he's not completely fallen off a cliff either. I think you look at him right now as a fringe wide receiver 1, maybe the 12th or 13th wide receiver drafted, and he has some upside in this offense as well. It should be favorable from a passing standpoint, so there's still some juice left for fantasy purposes with A.J. Green. Of course, Tyler Boyd last year, coming off a breakout season, goes up over 1,000 yards, finishes 16th among wide receivers in PPR scoring. Part of that was because of AJ's injury. They had nobody else to really rely on, so his numbers got juiced up a little bit, but in the same right, as the slot receiver in this offense, maybe not a super high fantasy ceiling, but a decent floor, and he should be put in a position where he sees some mismatches a la Cooper Kupp in the Rams offense. It's the same role that Tyler Boyd will play. So you look at him as a guy who has wide receiver 2 potential. You'll probably draft him outside of the wide receiver 2, so outside of the top 24, but not that far outside, honestly, and certainly could crack those numbers if everything shakes out right for this Bengals offense. Of course, you have John Ross there as well. Is he injured? Can he stay on the field? We know he can run. Very fast, in fact, but he can't stay on the field. So he's got to prove that first and foremost before he's going to be a fantasy asset. And really the same goes for Tyler Eifert at tight end. Tyler Eifert has shown flashes of elite fantasy potential over the course of his career, but he's also shown that he consistently gets hurt year in and year out. If he could ever stay on the field, he would be a fantasy tight end we'd look to use, but he just hasn't proven that so far in his career, so probably look to fade that situation. That being said, if he does miss time, CJ Uzomah is an interesting name that he's shown the ability to put up some fantasy points in the past as well. Otherwise, you have Andy Dalton, and I think we know at this point what we're going to get out of Andy Dalton. Best case scenario, you're talking quarterback 2 production, so top 20, maybe not top 15, certainly not top 12, but more likely outside of the top 20. Things could shake out the right way because he has a decent floor for him for fantasy purposes, but if you're really looking for major upside, even in 2 quarterback leagues, Andy Dalton isn't really an option who we're going to be pursuing this year. That being said, though, things are favorable in this Zach Taylor offense, so if we see things shake out the right way, yes, we may be able to salvage some QB2, 2 quarterback league value out of Andy Dalton in 2019. You want to see where Dalton, Mixon, Green, and the rest of the Bengals rank in our fantasy football rankings. You can check those out and more at PFF.com.